All right. Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening for our discussion, which is sponsored by the New England chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists. My name is James Labresco. I'm a student at Brown University and a senior staff writer for the Brown Daily Herald. And I'm very excited to be here today with Allison Butler, who is the Associate Chair of Communication and a Senior Lecturer of Communication at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Allison also serves as the vice president on the board of the Media Freedom Foundation, and she is the author of numerous articles and books on media literacy, including Educating Media Literacy, The Need for Teacher Education in Critical Media Literacy, and Surveillance Education, Navigating the Conspicuous Absence of Privacy in Schools, which she co-authored with Nolan Higdon. She is a co-author of multiple practical resources for media literacy education, including the open source text Critical Media Literacy and Civic Learning, Interactive Explorations for Students and Teachers, and The Media and Me, a guide to critical media literacy for young people. She's here tonight to talk about her book, The Judgment of Gender: How Women Are Centered and Silenced in Pop Culture. Allison, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, me as well. And yeah, I'm really excited to hear more about your book. So diving in, your book, as it says in the title, revolves around the themes of centering and silencing women in popular and political culture. And those two words are kind of antithetical to each other, in a way. And so I'm curious if we can start by just hearing a little bit more about what you mean by that.
Sure, sure. Yeah, no, that is definitely a tension that I am aware of, and a tension that I was very much aware of during the research and the writing of this. Partially because I put them together in part because we are seeing more women in pop culture. We see a lot of representations of women across fiction, nonfiction, across advertisements, right? In all kinds of media, right? Certainly our social influencers, our podcasters, etc. And yet
Yeah.
we also seem to be living in a time where, and I think this is a time that we've had for quite a while, and it ebbs and flows, and where we are, while we are seeing all these stories about women, we're also seeing stories that are being constructed about, not necessarily by women. So we're telling stories, a lot of stories about women. We're telling a lot of stories about women with women, but are women being given the opportunity to tell their own stories? And that's how I think women can be both centered and silenced, which is we have a very particular structure of stories that are being told versus hearing from women, or how we listen to, if really more, if we listen to when women tell their own stories.
Yeah. And I thought something that was really interesting in the introduction to your book, you talk about the summer of 2023,
Hmm.
where we have these kind of three big pop culture things come up, which are Taylor Swift's Eras Tour, the Barbie movie, and I believe it was Beyonce's album, right?
Hmm.
That had come up. And at the same time, you wrote that these were bringing kind of these themes into popular conversation, but at the same time, what real change emerged from
Yeah,
that? Um, kind of, do you see that continuing to play out today? Where else do you see it?
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, when we look at the summer of 2023, we're looking at probably really most of our big, large scale return to public events, right? After COVID. We had sort of started dipping in. Maybe many of us were getting vaccinated, and so we felt a little bit more comfortable, but certainly there was still that fear, still probably a greater degree of caution. Um, Maybe in hindsight, that caution was pretty wise. Maybe we should have done stuff differently. Who knows? But summer 2023, we really just saw a much bigger explosion of many of us returning to large scale events. And as some of these large scale events were the musical events of Taylor Swift and of Beyonce, and the movie Barbie, which got we can look at the numbers from that and see that not only was it just more people attending, but like we can see the ripple effects of that, right? I mean, the amount of money made from Taylor Swift's tour, from Beyonce's music, from the Barbie film, gives us this idea that at least for a moment in time, we saw a really feminized, driven economy. And then there's this kind of big pause because what we have after that is, Taylor Swift is continuously mocked for her celebrity boyfriends. I suppose I should say celebrity fiance.
Mhm.
She is politically ridiculed for coming out in favor of Kamala Harris, right? Beyonce somehow gets wrapped up in some sort of conspiracy theory that she and Jay-Z are running, like everybody must thank them. I guess a lot of people thank them on stage, and somehow that becomes a conspiracy theory. And we have this huge summer of Barbie, which, is not a perfect film or a perfect narrative in any stretch of the imagination, but we have this giant summer of Barbie, this celebration of women and girls, this celebration of mothers and daughters. And then within a year, we're back to really male-dominated cinema. So was there change, right? When we're looking at this systemically, when we get kind of beyond the representation, although of course the representation is hugely important, but when we start to look behind the scenes, when we look at the forces of production, ownership, and distribution, are we actually seeing systemic change? Or was that a moment in time that maybe gives us an opportunity for systemic change? Absolutely. But did that change actually start then? Or did we kind of fold it back into this kind of more male dominated, particularly white cis male dominated production industry of Hollywood and the music industry?
Yeah, it's really interesting how I mean, those themes really were centered, but then, what comes out of it.
And I think
Um,
what we also want to think about with Barbie is, and again, we can talk about Barbie all the live long day. There is tons of scholarship on Barbie, but when we look at a moment in time again at the film Barbie, Barbie comes out, right? The whole kind of joke over the summer was the um Barbieheimer, Oppenby, right? Like we're going to the two major films of that summer, Barbie and Oppenheimer. And when we look at Oppenheimer, it is obviously an incredibly important story in both our nation's history as well as our global history, right? The development and execution of the atom bomb. Like, what a huge technological shift. But when we look at the structure of the story of Oppenheimer, we are looking at a story that is predominantly about white men. Uh, that has a lot to do with the time, right? The time in which that film is telling us the story about, right? We did not allow, at that point in our country's history, we certainly weren't allowing women to be involved in, nuclear physics, advanced mathematics and science. We absolutely weren't allowing people of color to be involved in any of this. So when we look at the film Oppenheimer, which in many ways was a genius film in how it told the story, but I think there's a couple of things that stuck out for me when I was watching it was there were two scenes, brief, teeny tiny scenes in the movie where we see men of color, and it's one's at a rally, and there's men of color standing sort of in the front in this space. And I was like, absolutely not. There is no way at that point in history in the American Southwest that men of color are allowed in the front of an audience. If they are allowed at all, they are going to be in the back, right? And there's another scene where two characters are about to have a semi-clandestine meeting, and a third character brings them together, right? They're meeting in like an abandoned football arena, stadium, whatever. And the character that brings them together, the one that's sort of bringing them in, he's got a badge on, and he's a black man. And again, I was like, no way, no way is in this point in our nation's history is a black man going to be involved in allowing these clandestine meetings. The level of trust would simply not be there. There's two female characters in the film, one of whom is historically, I don't know how accurate, but based on an historical figure who was a known communist. And she's just like naked in the film. And, if you're in your own bedroom, if you're with your partner and you want to be naked, great. but there was really no reason for that to be part of the narrative. It didn't contribute to the narrative in any way, shape, or form. So I can just imagine, and of course I have no idea if this is true or not, but I can just imagine the sort of writer's room or production conversations where they get through like a level of filming and they're like, oh, we only have white guys in this film, right? Like, what do we do about that? So it's this kind of like awkward intersection, right? So when I'm thinking about this systemically, I'm thinking, what does it mean that we are still in our nation really relying on stories of white male success? There are other stories that we could be telling. We do see a counter to that with Barbie, is we're seeing a story of feminine and feminized success, also very white, of course. And so what do we do? Like, how do we look at our industry of Hollywood and the way in which we see or do not see women and do not see people of color in just what we value as the stories that we're telling?
Yeah. Yeah. And zooming a little bit out, I'm curious about what prompted you to write this book. Was it your consumption of media in society? And how is the process different or similar to some of the other books that you've written?
I'll start with that. It's real different. Most of what I've written has either been specifically for teachers, although I really hope teachers appreciate, like I hope teachers can get material out of this as well, or has been more academic writing. This is kind of my first foray into like a general audience, more of a, I mean, I don't know if it's going to be a popular book, but it's sort of a popular writing style, as it were, right? So that was real different for me. It was fun. I really liked it. It challenged my brain in ways that I think are really, really valuable. But to the first half of your question, actually did start this in a more academic space. I was invited by a friend
Mm.
and colleague who was an editor of an academic book on the increased censor, like global censorship, and he asked me if I would be interested in writing a chapter about gender and gender censorship of gender. And at the time I said, oh, that's a little bit out of my lane. That's a little bit out of my wheelhouse. Let me think about it for a minute. And to your point about my own pop culture consumption, I happened to be listening to a podcast that I really, really enjoy. It's called You're Wrong About. And it started off, it's changed over the years, but it started off as kind of exploring maligned women in popular culture, and the ways in which media told stories about these women that maybe if we revisit or we rethink about, they were really unfair tellings. And so I happened to be listening to a multi-part episode on Tanya Harding, the ice skater, and how she was just treated horribly. And you know, got back to my friend and I said, yes, I want to write this chapter, right? So I wrote a chapter where obviously it's a book chapter. It has to be short. Um, you have to stick to a pretty strict word limit. The longest footnote in that chapter was all the women that I knew I had left out, and I knew that there were so many more. So when the opportunity came up to expand it into a book and to expand it into maybe more of a general audience, I absolutely like landed on that. I was super excited to be able to continue it and to expand these stories that were being told. Looks like I lost James.
Apologies. I think I'm having some connectivity issues.
That's okay. It's nice to see your face again.
But yeah, I think I cut out when you were talking about this footnote that included so many women that
Ah,
you didn't have time
okay.
to.
So yeah, so I can head back to that if that's at all helpful. When I was writing the chapter, uh, that was the inspiration for this. I had there's, you only have so much room in a book chapter, right? And you're in an edited book with multiple other chapters, which is incredible. Like what a great group of scholars and what a great group of pieces that were in this. But it means you don't get all the space to yourself, right? So I felt like I was having this moment where I was like, I'm leaving so much out because of these structural limitations, right? That make total sense. And so I just wrote this really long footnote of like, here are all the women that I know that I'm ignoring, like that I know that are being left out of this. And so when I had the opportunity to turn this into a book and to make it more of a general audience book, like I got to go back to that footnote and I got to include all of those women and then some, right? And so the opportunity to kind of expand this into a bigger text, into its own text was something that I was very, very eager to do.
Yeah, and you tell so many stories in this book about many, many different women and several men as well.
Mhm.
And I'm curious when you were writing the book, how did you decide which stories to include?
Oh, sometimes there are definitely days where I would just sit and kind of stare for a little while or take the dog for, she's like, really, we're going for another walk? I'm like, yes, because I need some thinking to do. So some absolutely still met, you know, got deleted there. I still have all my wobbly drafts. And so like just in case there's another opportunity, I don't want to totally delete this. So it would be, put into another file. But basically, I guess the way that I kind of winnowed it down was I was trying to think about stories that could do at least two things. One, that would show us that this isn't kind of like just just a one-off thing, right? That we have seen this in different ways over time, right? And so how can we maybe think about, how could I think about as writing kind of showing an arc of time? I'm not an historian. I wasn't about to try and do an historical analysis of it. That's not where my training is, and I would have done a complete disservice to it. But we do have an arc of this story. So how can I tell that? Uh, and then the other inspiration, the other part of it was some of, women that I had learned about through my own research, but some were folks that like when I would talk to friends or colleagues about this, they would say, "Oh, but have you read about blah blah blah? Do you know about such and so?" Certainly with my research assistants who were college students, they were talking to me about so much social media stuff, and I was like, "This is just like, what are you, I need more. I need right. I need to. I don't understand this. This isn't my pop culture environment." So it was also an opportunity to bring in stories of women who were either forgotten or unknown to me that I really wanted to now learn about, or like ways in which, like the modalities by which we learn, speak like social media, right? I'm not a huge social media person. And so many of my, my research assistants would be talking about like, oh, but you need to think about Ballerina Farm. I'm like, who, what? And then I'm learning about tradwives. Like I had started reading about tradwives but hadn't quite gotten into the ballerina farm of it all, right? Uh, and so that was really helpful to kind of introduce me and help me understand uh, a, a modality that was not something that I was terribly well versed in. So my research assistants were absolutely invaluable for kind of forcing my middle-aged brain to understand more about social media. So yeah, it was the ability to try and both tell a story and maybe tell a story that we didn't know much about.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting too because pop culture can mean so many different things.
Mhm.
And obviously that impacts how you tell these stories. And so, to you, what did pop culture mean? Did your idea of pop culture shift while you were writing this book?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think I am probably maybe a little bit of old-fashioned when it comes to pop culture. I'm somebody that still, you know, I mean, sure, I stream television shows, but like I kind of still have maybe some of that old-fashioned media. I love listening to, okay, satellite radio. I guess I've advanced into satellite radio, but like, I'm a big music listener. I um, definitely will, especially now with the end of the semester, we'll get into like binge watching of something. I'm a huge reader, and physical books, like always physical books. Digital books drive me bonkers. I can't concentrate or focus on them. And so, one of the things I also thought it was like really my responsibility to kind of walk my talk, right? So one of the things I say to my students all the time in my classes is to be critical isn't to dislike, right? I think we might assume that to be critical of something means that, especially when we're walking into a classroom, means that my job is to say this is what's bad about it. And I don't think that that's true. To be critical about something is to take a little bit of a distance from it. It's to see whatever it is that we're looking at as a multidimensional object. And it is easier to be critical of stuff we don't like, right? It's always easier to find the things we don't like about it. It's a lot harder to be critical of what we do like. So
Mhm.
part of my challenge too was to say, hey, I need to start thinking about things a little bit differently or do my own self-reflection, right? As I point out in the introduction, like when Britney Spears first kind of exploded on the pop music scene, no way was I listening to her music. I thought it was terrible. Assumed she was going to be a one-hit wonder, and then I would never need to think about her again. Boy, was I wrong, right? So questioning our own assumptions, questioning our own likes and dislikes, not to show or to badger that we're doing something wrong, but to maybe think about things a little bit differently, right? What happens when we revisit? Um, I actually have grown into thinking that Britney Spears is incredibly talented. Also, probably has a lot of significant life struggles right now, and throughout her career. But holy mackerel, the talent on that woman, right? That's giant. So that was pretty snotty of me. At the time that I thought her music sucked, I was in my, early 20s. I was living in New York City. I was way more into like the New York City indie scene. And so therefore I was too cool for Britney Spears, right? So there was also trying to think about, hey, what do I need to look at differently? Like, how do I need to put myself into this work of critical analysis with a little bit more humility and a little bit more of an expansive way of thinking about it?
Got it. And I know you mentioned Britney Spears. What were some of the other stories or chapters in the book where you really had to do that? And even just more generally, which are there any chapters that stick out to you as kind of where you learned the most, where you told something really interesting? Um,
I I think the lessons that I one of the lessons that I learned so much in writing this book and that I am still very, very much learning about is I'd say there's probably a few different areas, but the chapter that is about violence against women and that violence against women because they are women. And I did a real deep dive into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Not that violence against any woman is somehow okay in any way, shape, or form, but I think the violence against Indigenous women and girls is particularly horrific, in part because there is a generational um, multi-generational attempt at eradicating these human beings, right? When we look back at early days of colonization, when we look back at all the first white settlers who landed on the shores of this nation, it was a very systemic project to eradicate the indigenous population. And one thing that I learned, and when I started learning it, I just kept diving into it further. And I don't think I've learned nearly enough of it. I think there's so much more to learn, and I'm trying to keep doing that. But one thing that I was reading was about how many indigenous cultures were not patriarchies, right? They were more community based. They were collaborative. They revered women in part because women were the creators, the bearers of life, right? And so the colonizers came in and noted this treatment of women, and that was their project, was to undo that. Because when you undo the women of a society, when you take down women, when you um, make their ability to reproduce absolutely impossible, that is a way to destroy. a population. It is a way to destroy multiple populations because, of course, the indigenous populations in this nation on this land were not homogenous. It wasn't just one, right? It's multiple different tribes, multiple communities across a vast swath of land, right? With different cultures and different routines and different ways of living, all that sort of stuff. And the colonizers managed to kind of homogenize them. So by the time you and I are in school, we learn about like the Native American as if it's one thing, right? Versus a really complex and complicated human beings. The systematic effort to undo women, we see that over generations, right? We certainly see it through just out and out killing, right? Just bald-faced killing of them. When that stopped kind of working, we see the indigenous, the residential schools where families, the children were basically kidnapped and being told they were being sent to school, but it absolutely wasn't. It was houses of servitude. It was untold sexual and physical and emotional abuse. Children died and were buried in mass graves. Their families were never told. This is a way to destroy a population. When that sort of lost favor, we had the kind of good, it was labeled, it was sold as like this sort of good Christian adoption, known as the Great Scoop in the 1960s and 1970s, where indigenous children were kidnapped from their homes because their homes were deemed inappropriate. Inappropriate by Western standards, maybe because it's a multicultural or multi-generational being raised by grandmas or aunties or cousins, etc. And certainly abject poverty, but that was also abject poverty that the colonizers had enabled. And many of these indigenous children were adopted into white families, and the prevailing wisdom at the time for many adoptions, not just indigenous adoptions, but for many adoptions, was it was considered healthier. Goodness knows how this was ever believed, but considered healthier to not tell children about their adoptive status, that to sort of like shield them from that. But then you have children who do not look like their family members, who might not be able to, say, tolerate the same foods as their family members, who are growing up thinking that something is horribly wrong with them. And then their birth families were never told what happened to their children. And then we have the forced sterilization when indigenous women would go to the doctor for, gynecological or otherwise treatment. Oftentimes they would be forced into sterilization during surgical procedures that they never consented to and had no idea were happening. When we get to today, when we get to, the 2010s, 2020s, it's happened long before this, of course, is we're seeing indigenous women and girls be disappeared. We're seeing them be murdered. We're seeing them vanish into thin air in some way, and there isn't robust response from law enforcement. And so that was something, these are just considered disposable bodies, right? And so indigenous communities are once again fighting for their own existence and fighting for their own lives. And there are so many amazing social justice campaigns and art campaigns and social networks to try and find support for their family members. And so that was something that really hit me very hard in terms of my own arc of learning, and that I wanted to kind of keep learning more about that. And It is one of the times when I talk about this, that it is often something that other people don't know about. And so if I have an opportunity with this book as a platform to expand our knowledge of that, I think that that is 1000% my responsibility to do.
Yeah, yeah. Going off of that point, you also write a bit about the role of the media and how there's been this kind of limited media coverage of
Mhm.
missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls.
Absolutely.
Yeah, do you want to? I mean, what role does the media play for this issue, but in general? I mean, we'll talk in a little bit about your chapter about Maureen Dowd and Linda
Sure.
Tripp.
Sure.
Um,
Well, when we look at missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, I think in some ways, when we're looking at it as a news story, we're looking at the absence of coverage. right? There was one newspaper that covered the building of a town ice rink before it covered a missing girl, right? You have a child missing, but somehow that doesn't get a headline, but the new
Mhm.
ice rink, and I get it, the new ice rink is probably hugely important, right? What a great place for community. What a great place for gathering. If you live in a really cold spot, what a wonderful place to like gather together, but at the expense of writing about a missing child, like that seems wrong. And yet that's perfect. That has been normalized, right? The idea that missing and murdered girls are just not even addressed in the news. This is, one thing we'll talk about in media literacy is like the absence of data is data, right? So the idea that we don't have a story about a missing human being, a child, that in and of itself, I think is a huge amount of data. I will say a counter to that is in more recent years, there are more television programs, about and by and for Indigenous people, right? There's a great show on Hulu called Reservation Dogs. And it is written, produced, directed, and starring all Indigenous people. The only white people in that production are people who are white actors who play white characters, right? All the Indigenous characters are played by Indigenous actors. And I went down a deep, deep rabbit hole with this show when I first started watching it. And I would watch it and I'd be looking up like the clothing that they're wearing, the art that they're standing in front of, different references that they're making, the music that's playing in the background. All of it is indigenous. There's one scene where a main character is having a little bit of an existential crisis and he's kind of hidden out in a porta potty, right? And it's got graffiti in the background, and the graffiti is by indigenous graffiti artists, right? And we have a history of our media about indigenous people that is all about either their stuff, and we do this to all of our bodies of color, all of our representations of bodies of color have this history of tropes, right? It's your zany, wacky best friend, it's your spirit, like especially for indigenous folks, it's like your spiritual guide, or it is exclusively stories about pain. And yes, there is a lot of pain, and I think we need to address that pain. But when we reduce a people to just pain, we forget that they also have joy and community and celebration. And so Reservation Dogs brings in a particular type of pain. The main characters are grieving the death of their friend. Um, but it also brings in their beautiful friendship and their relationships with their community and the adventures that they're having. There's another show, it's called North of North, and it is about Arctic community, indigenous community, and it has this lightness to it where there's, of course, I mean, it's a sitcom. There's going to be pratfalls and struggles, but it's also showing again that joy of collection, that joy of community, that joy of collaboration. If we reduce a body to one specific negative characteristic, and that is the only story that we tell, then the rest of us might believe that that is the only story that is to be told. So we need to, I think, expand our stories. And I think that is one place where pop culture can be such an incredible guide, is that it's a pop culture is our storyteller, right? And so maybe we can also be telling some different stories. We can tell stories about joy and pain, about success and happiness and struggle instead of just one very narrow lane.
Yeah, and to continue with this idea of the framing of stories and how we tell stories, you devote almost all the chapter
Mhm.
in your book to the relationship between Maureen Dowd, the New York Times columnist, and Linda Tripp, who was
Mhm.
a federal official and a confidant, a friend of Monica Lewinsky, if you can call her that.
Use giant scare
Formerly.
quotes on that one, right?
Yeah, exactly. But can you tell us a little bit about this chapter and
Sure.
kind of the role of the media?
Sure, sure. So, oh boy. So we're talking about the late 1990s, and Monica Lewinsky was a young woman. She was given an internship in the West Wing of the White House, and through a series of time, place, manner. She got a lot closer to the West, like to the Oval Office, than most interns would, right? We happen to be, this is something that we're all a little bit more familiar with now. We were in a bit of a government shutdown, and so people weren't allowed to work for pay, but you could keep the interns on, right? And through a lot of complicated finagling, she and President Clinton embarked on what we easily and can quickly, for the sake of expediency, call an affair. But one of the things that I point out in the book is that they, over the course of a couple years, they really only met about a couple dozen times, right? I think we think of affairs as regular, ongoing, daily, maybe consume our time, right? Take us away from our, responsible daily activities. I don't know if there is a better word for what we see with Monica Lewinsky and Bill Clinton, but the quantity of time that they spent together might not be what most of us think of as an affair, right? Monica Lewinsky was a young woman. She was about 22 years old. She might not have been making the most responsible choices about her paramour, as it were. We also have a huge power differential between the two, right? We could talk about the age difference if we want to, but maybe more importantly for this is the giant power differential, right? You have the leader of the free world embarking on um, a semi-sexual relationship. He insists that it was never fully that relationship with a 22-year-old intern. So yes, Monica Lewinsky made some choices about who to confide in. It wasn't just Linda Tripp, but she confided in her mother and some of her friends as well. But Linda Tripp had the most centralized platform, given that she also worked at the White House and later again with Monica Lewinsky at the Pentagon. Both were moved out of the White House. Monica Lewinsky was moved out because she was considered sort of being too friendly, a little too chatty, a little too colloquial. And I think Linda Tripp was moved out because she was just, frankly, a very sour individual. And she hated the Clintons and made no, like, she didn't try to disguise that, right? And so she was the one who illegally taped her phone calls with Monica Lewinsky. That's illegal in the state of Maryland. You have to have two-party consent, and she did not get that. So she also a little bit of, broke the law, but she broke the story open. And then you get the third side of this triangle, Maureen Dowd, who started at the New York Times as a political writer, but was deemed also, I guess we can make this connection if we want to, but her writing was considered too casual for political writing. So they shifted her to the op-ed because she's a good writer, right? She crafts a sentence really, really well. She's got some serious, like, she knows how to wordsmith, right? And she's got some zingers. I'm not going to say she's not a talented writer. Maureen Dowd, excuse me, did in her political writing was very good at kind of a public skewering of public figures, right? Public skewering using the platform of the New York Times, the large, the paper of record for the nation, etc. Um, the hugest newspaper platform, I suppose, at that time outside of USA Today, which was like on every hotel doorstop. But really, the New York Times was the serious press. And so she had an incredible platform for her skewering, for her biting and scathing op-eds. But what we see when we start to look at how Maureen Dowd writes is how willing she is to harm other women when she writes scathingly about men, it is about like their bad haircuts or that they choose golf over, a more serious conversation or so on and so forth. But when she writes about women, she's attacking women for being women. And the irony, the upsetting of it, however we want to call it, her first piece on Monica Lewinsky, when the news started to break about Monica Lewinsky and Bill Clinton, her first piece was the press is going to destroy this woman. And that was absolutely true, right? That was absolutely true. Monica Lewinsky was held up to be 100% responsible for everything that had happened, as if Bill Clinton was just an innocent bystander in all of this. He got out of it largely unscathed. I mean, yes, he had to have some seriously embarrassing conversations, on the record. And Kenneth Starr, who wrote the Starr report that kind of brought it all out in absolute gory detail. I'm sure there's no doubt it was embarrassing, but as far as his presidential record goes, he ends up largely unscathed. He doesn't lose his job. Monica Lewinsky can't get a job for 10, 20 years. She can't do much of anything because she's always going to be that girl, right? So much of the skewering of her was about her body, that and about her apparent lack of smarts. I guess, her voice wasn't considered with enough gravitas, right? She was a little too flighty. And of course, all the comments about her body, that she was constantly gaining and losing weight, as if that had anything to do with her aptitude for her work. And Maureen Dowd led the charge, right? She led the charge. She wrote a series of op-eds mocking Monica Lewinsky, or mocking her by sort of writing as if she were Monica Lewinsky. There's one op-ed that she writes as if it's a journal entry, right? Um, and for that, she won the Pulitzer Prize, right? She won the top journalism award, or a top award in journalism for mocking another woman. And it was considered, yes, it's on the op-ed pages, no doubt, but it was news and was considered journalism. And that I think is really kind of dangerous, that we're making fun of somebody's body, we're making fun of somebody's voice, we're making fun of somebody's maybe emotional immaturity that is absolutely on a national stage. And the person with whom she was engaging in all of these acts goes largely unscathed. To me, that says we really struggle with how we treat women.
Yeah, and she won the Pulitzer for her quote fresh and insightful columns about
Fresh
the
and insightful columns. Mean
yeah.
and nasty.
Yeah, and I mean, since then, do you think that the media and the culture that rewards it has changed how it covers women?
No.
Um, or no? No, do you want to talk about that?
No, I don't think it's changed how it covers women, but I do think we push back more quickly, right? This is the late 1990s that this is happening between Monica Lewinsky, Linda Tripp, Maureen Dowd, and of course, Bill Clinton, and of course, Hillary Clinton, right? All of these humans are involved in this. And it is really not until the hashtag Me Too, which, by the way, the hashtag Me Too comes well after Me Too actually started. So, really, emphasis on the hashtag of Me Too,
Hmm.
that we start to look at the treatment of Monica Lewinsky a little bit differently, that we start to revisit, that we start to look back and say, whoa, we actually, as a nation, treated her terribly. So that's significant number of years, right? We're talking about 20 years. I do think now we are still, as a society, treating women in the press, news stories about women, pretty terribly. But I do think we are pushing back a little sooner, right? The Epstein files might be kind of a horrible example of this. Obviously, so many of the human beings harmed by Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, that too has been several years, decades, right? We might not have, like, the regular average folk might not have found out about it until recently. So I absolutely acknowledge that I've been going on for years. But I think once we regular old-fashioned people started hearing about it, we pushed back on that very quickly, right? And that has been uh, a sustained thorn in this presidential administration's side, is that the desire to open up the Epstein files and to punish those who have harmed young girls, that is not going away. And so these young women were absolutely treated horribly for way too many years, and it was brushed aside for way too many years. But I do think when we learned about it, the pushback has been fierce and sustained. And so that might be where it is a little bit different, is that um, we when we find out about things, we might have more opportunities to um, shift the narrative sooner. I look at, a couple of years ago, what was it, 2023? Don Lemon was still a host on CNN, and Nikki Haley, a Republican, was looking to enter into the presidential election. And Don Lemon made a kind of flippant, almost offhand comment about how she was past her prime. And it was within 24, 36 hours that people had responded. Now, here's the downside to this is that people responded, and he said his response was, I didn't intend to hurt anybody. I'm sorry. I didn't, but that's not an apology. An apology is, I'm sorry. And if, we can continue the conversation, but I didn't intend your intention, the intention doesn't matter here. You made a comment specifically about a woman's age that past her prime meant she couldn't be president, whereas all of our male presidents are well over their 50s, right? I mean, it's Barack Obama and Bill Clinton that are our youngest ones, but we would never say a man in his mid 50s was past his prime. With that, we pushed back right away. He suffered professional consequences right away, but I still think it was kind of a weak sauce apology. I didn't intend to. Intention, if wrong has been done, intention might not be what you're apologizing for intention versus apologizing for the act. And I think the appropriate apology, the legit, the genuine apology is just, I am sorry, I did wrong. I'm going to try and not do that again.
Yeah, well, it is interesting the pushback he received. And it reminds me of something else you write about. You talk about how a lot of the themes in the book are pretty disheartening about the
Yeah.
world. But you also write about how critical media literacy can be used to push back against this kind of discentering and silencing of women. What does that look like in practice?
So you're right. I mean, I do think that there's a lot of really dark stuff. And the fact that we are hurt as a nation and as a globe, that we seem so accepting of hurting women or allowing women to be hurt is a real negative mark. I would also extend that to say we also hurt boys and men. This is not like a man-hating text, right? This is not anti-man. I think patriarchy hurts men too. I think patriarchy hurts our men and our boys who might not fit into the mold that the really limited mold that patriarchy has structured, right? But I don't like the idea of, yeah, so, this is all really dark and negative and bad. And then we end the conversation there. To me, that feels really terrible. So the work of critical media literacy helps us see the terrible ways in that we are treating women, and certainly by extension, the terrible ways that we are treating men. And then it invites us to there are ways that we can push back, right? And I know that there's kind of this knee-jerk response. I feel it many days too, where it's like, but the media are too big, right? The corporate media, these conglomerations, these giant billionaire companies. What the heck am I supposed to do in my home or in my classroom? Like, what power do I have? But we do. Right? We do have power because we can, our media corporations in this country, the vast majority of our media corporations are private, for-profit corporate structures. Their number one goal is to make money. If you and I happen to be entertained and informed along the way, great. But their number one, their biggest priority is to make money. And so one way that we can push back is maybe not spending that kind of time or that kind of money. But the way we can do that is, and I'm not one to say like, oh, turn it all off, right? Believe me, as soon as you and I are done with this, I'm gonna go like finish watching. We're just about to finish watching. We're a little bit late to the game on this, but we're just about to finish watching season 5, the last episode of Stranger Things. Like, heck yeah, I'm watching that, right? So I'm not saying turn it off by any stretch of the imagination, but let's try and look at it a little bit differently. How do we see for the purposes of this conversation, but we can extend this to all kinds of conversations. How do we see women and girls being treated? Who is doing the writing, the producing, the directing? Who greenlights these projects? We live in a world that's pretty easy where a lot of stuff shows up on our streaming or on our social media sites. But how'd they get there? Because a lot of people are getting said no to. Certain things get said yes to, right? In the sort of Hollywood video, movie, TV production, right? So what comes, so we let's spend some time analyzing that. As we started this conversation, who's telling these stories, right? I'm not saying men can't write about women or women can't write about men. Absolutely not at all. But let's start by looking at who's telling the story. What might their perspective be? How is this story being told? Can we expand our viewing? Not turn it off. Can we expand our viewing? Can we watch something that might be outside of what we normally watch, so that we can learn a slightly different story? If we're really into watching, for example, what if we expanded to something that we listen to or something that we read so that we start to learn a little bit different? With streaming devices can be excellent research tools right away because those streaming devices capture everything that we do watch. And so we get a real history of it. I know folks who use like Spotify for their music. You get that Spotify Wrapped at the end of the year, and you can see like everything you've ever listened to. What amazing data we have right there for us. You can bet those corporations are looking at that data for figuring out how to streamline more to us so that they get to make more money. But how about we use that data? Am I listening to how many female artists am I listening to on Spotify? Can I expand my music a little bit and see if I can see something different, right? Um, why do I keep getting these types of recommendations on any one of my streaming devices? What if I tried to watch something different? Could I learn more, right? Could I expand my understanding of it? So that's just in our own personal viewing, reading, watching, listening to, etc. Those are just personal things that we can do. But then maybe that inspires us to change some of our viewing. As I said, my research assistants who were college students like forced me to look at social media sites, at short form videos, etc., that I wasn't watching. And so I got to learn some new stuff, right? Didn't love all of what I learned, but I got to learn about it and I got to get a better understanding of it, right? And then maybe we take action. Maybe we stop watching stuff that we realize is really harmful, in its representation, right? Or maybe we do a letter writing campaign and we say, "Hey, Hollywood." Probably need to make it a little bit more specific than "Hey, Hollywood," but you know, what this is insulting, or this is unfair, or the exact opposite. This is a great story. Thank you. Please make more stories like this, right? We are paying with our time. We are paying with our eyeballs. We are paying with our ears, and we are paying with our dollars. How about we contribute to what we're paying for? What do I want to see? What kind of stories would I like more of or less of? Maybe a little bit of a letter writing campaign. Um, or something along those lines, right? So that we can actually do a little bit more. Yeah, we're probably not going to take down the corporate media by one letter or even a letter writing campaign, but it does give us a bit of agency. It gives us a bit of autonomy. It gives us the opportunity to talk back to our media when usually it is presented to us as kind of a one-way relationship. Doesn't have to be a one-way relationship.
Yeah, no, that is really interesting. And I think social media also kind of plays a big role in that because it opens up a forum kind of for response
Mhm.
um, as well. But yeah, I mean, those are so many action items that people watching can, kind of integrate into their lives. Is there anything else that you want your readers to take away from the book outside of, these aspects of critical media literacy?
Maybe two things. One is, let's not be ashamed of maybe having done some poor treatment in the past. As I said, I thought Britney Spears was really a one-hit wonder and didn't like her music and thought she was untalented, and I was 1,000% wrong on all of that. And that's okay. Sometimes it's really fun to be wrong, right? Um, when the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas nomination hearing was going on, I
Mm,
pretty much bypassed it, right? The idea that I ignored it as a young person, oh goodness, it's kind of a little bit mortifying that something that huge and that I've realized over the years has had an impact on so many people's lives. Having a Clarence Thomas on the Supreme Court has had a significant impact on people's lives who weren't around during that nomination hearing, right? The decisions that he's made has impacted your life, and you might probably weren't even alive then, right? So like, don't be afraid to be wrong, and don't be afraid to look back and say, "Oh yeah, I kind of missed the boat on that one." Um, how about we just embrace like what we can do now? And I guess the other thing is maybe we also kind of watch our own vocabulary when we're calling people names, because we're calling people names. What are we calling them? Are we calling them body parts that are meant to be insulting, that are
mm,
usually attached to women's bodies? How about we don't do that? There's a lot of gender neutral or gender inclusive insults. Let's use those, right? We're all going to talk trash. Let's admit it. It's going to happen. But why do we have to talk gender trash, right? Why don't we just talk gender neutral or gender inclusive trash? Like, let's also think about our own vocabulary. And I mean that for how we treat women as well as how we treat men, right? So that's an opportunity for us to kind of do a little self-exploration. And I say that not as somebody who is like perfect and awesome and flawless at this by any stretch of the imagination. This was very much a learning process for me as well. Um, and I was both exhausted and super motivated doing this work because there was just so much emotion involved in some of the things that were being learned. And also, whoa, it is really actually kind of easy to change our own
mm.
vocabulary. And it's really actually the process of self-reflection. Self-reflection is difficult, right? But the process of, hey, let me try and look at this a different way, that's not too hard. That's that we can do that, right? And that's how we can each and every one of us can make a little bit of difference, and then that's going to make a huge difference.
Allison, thank you so much for joining us today. I've really have enjoyed learning about your book, and some of the stories behind it. So thank
Thank
you.
you so much. This was really fun, and I'm super psyched that this is, that Brown University is interested in this. I'm always happy to check in with students, to learn more from students, to get dragged kicking and screaming more into social media. So let me know what else I need to learn, please.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I'm not too far away from you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good old New England.
Awesome. Adam, are we all set? Okay.